don't know if you heard about this. I didn't really know about it until this week. I was in the gym with some of those guys, and the one guy was telling me that there is some sort of an asteroid traveling at incredible speeds. It's just past the sun, and it's on a direct course for Earth. They've been able to see it through a telescope, and the heat of the sun warmed it up, and it began to glow in all these different colors. And also, there is speculation that this meteor is changing its route sort of indiscriminately along the way. So the conversation that morning went from the end of the world because there's a meteor swirling quickly at incredible paces at an enormous size to Earth, to there is a UFO on its way to Earth to come and visit us, right? So it was a conversation that was comical to say. And at the end, of course, because of what I do, and I'm called Eminence in the gym. His Eminence has arrived, is what they say when I show up. And they say that simply so that they stop cursing, because their language is very entertaining before I get there, and sometimes they slip into it. And it's just a bunch of guys, blowing off steam and having fun. But, of course, they come to me and they say, so, is this meteor it? Are we done for? Is this the way this goes? And I'm like, what are you asking me for? And they're like, you don't know? Oh, okay. All right, listen, and they're pushing me. Well, clearly, look at everything that's happening in the world. There's all these wars. There's all this famine, right? There's people starving to death. Africa is a total mess, right? There's stuff happening all over the world. All of this is horrid. And I said, yeah, but listen, the history of humanity on the face of this planet has had this during the time of Jesus all the way through up into now. He says, well, we don't understand. How can you say that you study scriptures and you can't read these signs of the times? And so I said, you want scripture? And they're like, yeah. I said, well, Jesus says, the day or the hour, even I do not know. Only the Father knows. And they were like, it really says that? I'm like, yeah, it really says that. And he says, well, how do we get in touch with that Father guy to figure out if this hurling thing coming at town? It was really very funny. And they weren't meaning to be disrespectful, but it is a question. And for all of us, there is a point where somewhere in the course of this week, I found myself asking, what is it that Jesus means to me? So I would ask you the same thing. What is Jesus to you? What does he mean to you? Is he just a myth? Because there's plenty of people arguing out there now that this man Jesus never existed, all of which doesn't have any historic basis, because they're missing huge sections of Roman historians writing about Jesus. But whatever. There's a lot of people saying out there that he doesn't exist. There's a lot of people who believe that Jesus is simply just a really nice guy. And we should be following his example because he is a nice guy. There's people out there who feel that, yes, indeed, he was holy, but for us as Christians, it's not just about that he was a holy man. We go farther. We go the farthest and say that he was God incarnate on earth. In 2 weeks from now, you and I will start a journey of Advent, and it will take the Christian church on the face of the planet through 4 weeks of preparing ourselves again to ask ourselves the question, who is this baby lying in this manger, and what difference does he make to us? But I have to ask you honestly, who and what is Jesus to you? Because it seems to me to make all the difference. It seems to me that in Luke's gospel, it makes all the difference. Jesus is looking at the world, and look, just for the record, just to set this straight, Luke's gospel is written around 80 AD, okay? About 50, 60 years after the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus. A lot of what he's writing about has already taken place. The sack of Jerusalem takes place in 70 AD. And in the sack of Jerusalem, the Romans are so annoyed with the Jews that what do? They dismantle the temple and they tear down what? One stone from another, because it was all built out of stones. So this has happened. Luke's community, who is writing what Luke has shared with them, or Luke himself, we're really not sure, is aware of all this. There are earthquakes. There are famine. Famine was very common during Jesus' day. People died of famine all the time. A lot of what was indicated in Luke's writing was prevalent to them, even as far as the persecutions. The persecutions were happening shortly after Jesus' ascension into heaven. They were chasing after the Romans, wanted to squash the entire Jesus movement, and so they were looking for every single one that they could. And indeed, the Acts of the Apostles has great stories about how the disciples escaped being captured, and that how many of them, were tormented, tortured, themselves crucified and died, and, hanging upon spikes and set afire, to become Roman candles to light up the roads. I mean, this is all happening when Luke is writing all this, which leads you to ask, okay, it's very possible Jesus mentioned all of these things and that he pointed it out, and that Luke is simply recalling the fact that people recall Jesus talking about all this. Well, the problem is, Luke goes further and basically says, despite the fact that they will seize you and persecute you and all that, you will be handed over by friends, brothers, relatives, and friends. You will be hated by all because of my name. Luke goes on to have Jesus tell us, not a hair of your head will be destroyed. Your perseverance will secure your lives. He's talking to people who see Jesus as more than simply a myth. He's talking to people who see Jesus more than simply a good man. He's talking to a people who have experienced the resurrected Christ and have heard the stories about this Jesus, and themselves have transformed their lives to become more of a witness and a mimic of who Jesus is. The letter that Tom read about Paul is really kind of telling. Were you paying attention? Paul says, we're not here to talk about this. We're actually trying to live it so that we give you an example of how it is that you should be living as followers of Jesus Christ. And I think that is so profound, because in our world, man, there's a lot of talk. And we are really good at arguing about theological things and points and issues, and church after church, they battle over what this means and what that means and what this is and what that is. But yet you never hear any of them trying to sort of raise the same flag that Paul was trying to talk about, and that is giving witness. What Luke is talking about, and that is living the reality of who this Jesus is in your life, that you accept Jesus as truly the Son of God, and as such, with all the struggles and all the challenges and all the stuff we go through, Jesus is the answer to all of that. Jesus is the peace to all of that. But let me ask you, I'm sure some of you have gone through something this week. You tell me, how fast were you to go to Jesus and try to find refuge in him to deal with whatever the crisis or disaster was that you were dealing with? We're not. We're not very good at that. I don't know why. We sit here and we say we believe. We sit here and we say that we dedicate our lives and that we want to grow deeper into this relationship with Jesus. And yet when we're pushed up against it, the very first thing we do is we try to fix it ourselves. The very first thing we do is we don't depend on Jesus. We don't go to Jesus. And I think we have to be honest and ask ourselves, why is that? Which brings me back to the question that we started with. Who is Jesus to us? Now, look, there's absolutely nothing wrong with us sitting here today saying and feeling uncomfortable about what it is that I just pointed out, which is a reality in all of our lives. And if it's not in yours, God bless you, it is in mine. You know? I struggle to try to find meaning and purpose in what you see and what you encounter, and when you're hurting and when you're in pain and when you get bad news and when you see everything that's happening around you, or you're having a bad day, you immediately try to fix it. And if you don't try and fix it by, physically doing something, there are plenty of ways that we substitute Jesus for a resolution to our issues. Drugs, alcohol, food. I mean, think about TV, social media. Tell me if we're not surrounded by things that we utilize to what? Bring us comfort, when actually our faith relationship, forget about faith. You talk about faith, people think about church. Our relationship with Jesus should be that person that we go to first. You know what I realized this week? When I get out of bed, I am much quicker at reaching for my phone than I am thanking Jesus for the fact that I have my life. I am much faster at reaching for my phone than recognizing the presence of Jesus when I wake up in the morning. Maybe some of you feel the same. But what does that say? What does it say about what it is that Jesus means to us? And look, we're not always going to get it right, okay? And I would hope in the deepest, darkest times of our life that we will respond and we will reach out and we will find our refuge and our strength. Because, this promise, not a hair of your head will be destroyed, that comes right out of Jesus' mouth. Not a hair of your head will be destroyed. Now, some of us have more hair than others, but the point is that generally speaking, Jesus is promising that he's got us. Jesus is promising that he is right there with us. No matter what anyone says, no matter what the world does to us, no matter what the situation, no matter what the circumstance, no matter what it is around us, Jesus has got us. And Jesus says that, but there is an action that's required on us, and that is accepting that, reaching for that, holding on to that statement is what is necessary for us. Because otherwise, what is it that we're actually believing in? Who is it that we're actually believing in? Or do we think that Jesus isn't worthy to be trusted? We have to ask ourselves these questions. I'm simply asking us as human beings to address the obstacles that are in our way as we're trying to have a relationship with Jesus. And some of it could have to do with how we were raised, things that have happened to us in the past, bereavement, loss. I mean, the list goes on and on. There are a ton of things that happen to us that little by little chip away and put questions into our mind about who this Jesus really is. And the sooner we recognize that those questions exist, the sooner we are honest with ourselves and honest with God and say, look, I'd very much like to believe that this is all true, that you care, that you got my back. But at the same time, right now I'm hurting. And by the way, remember all these things that happened to me? Where were you then? Why didn't you show up then? Why didn't I feel you then? And I think the response from God will be, well, why didn't you reach out for me? I don't know about you, but the times that I've really needed God and I've really focused directly and entirely on Him and have asked Him to be at a moment. And listen, I can't tell you how many times at a bedside, at a hospital, at a car crash, on the phone with someone who's dealing with that, I'm not asking God to step up and show Himself, because this stuff's too heavy for me, you know. Someone just asked me this week over a dinner, they said, what do you do with everything that you hear? In the course of a week, some of the stuff I hear is troubling. And there is no way as a human being to separate yourself from all of that. There's no way, if you're going to be effective, that you separate yourself and are not empathetic and compassionate. But in order to do that, you have to step into the darkness of the other person. And that is an amazing challenge. And some of you perhaps have had that experience with individuals that you've encountered yourself, or family members or something, where you actually have to go into the darkness in order to grab them by the hand to pull them out. And sometimes stepping into the darkness, when you come out, some of that is left on you. It is for me. And I shared with him, first of all, you know, there is a very good friend of mine who he and I try to, you know, meet up once or twice a month. He's also a minister, and he's a therapist, and we try to unload because you have to process this stuff. But honestly, the other thing is, when I have to enter into the darkness and I feel it coming, it's exactly the time that I say to Jesus, you're leading. And it's a mental thing. It's an emotional thing. It's like I have no idea where this is going. I have no idea how dark this is going to get. But I know I can't do this myself. And by the way, you're the one who put me in this situation in the first place. So if you think you're getting out of any of this, you got another thing coming. So you're walking in with me. And honestly, it has made all the difference in my ministry. The best thing I could do is recognize the fact that I can't. But Jesus can. And what I'm asking is, if I can do that in those moments like that, why aren't I bringing Jesus into other easier moments that I really should be turning these things over? I should be turning these things over to Jesus, not because of a religion or a belief system or whatever, but because of who He is and what He means to me. And we all sort of stumble along with that. But not a hair of our head will be destroyed. That's the promise. Not a hair of our head, one single hair. That's a profound and very strong statement to make on the part of Jesus and our lives. Not a hair of our head He will allow to be destroyed. This week, your homework. Reflect on the question. Who is He to you? Who is Jesus to you? The answer makes all the difference about how we live our lives. It makes all the difference in how we see other people. It makes all the difference in the hope and the joy that we should be experiencing. And if we're not experiencing that to the fullness, then you have to ask yourself, then there is something missing. There's something stopping us, holding us back from clinging to the robe of the Master and hanging on for dear life, trusting that He is the one who will get us through, and that not a single hair of our head will be destroyed. God bless you.